Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked, and I am delighted to be joined by Rupa Subramanya, writer at the Free Press. She is joining me live from Ottawa. Rupa, welcome.
Thanks, Fraser, for having me. It's great to be here.
Rupa, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because things are going a little bit wild in Canada, where you live. Justin Trudeau has announced his intention to step down. For many people around the world, he's sort of one of the few leaders left from the pre-Trump age. So it is someone who is, well recognised for a Canadian leader. Internationally, I wanted to ask how he's perceived in Canada, because internationally he's still seen, I think, very much this sort of energetic, young, quite progressive, quite liberal sort of type politician. But how do Canadians see him, especially now that he's on his way out?
Well, I would even challenge the premise that he's seen, he still seems to have a good reputation internationally, because that could, one could argue, our standing in the world has really gone down over the last 10 years that Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister. But here in Canada, Justin Trudeau and his party have been tanking in the polls now for well over a year now. They risk losing, party status if the next elections were to be held today. Where meanwhile the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, has been they're way ahead in the polls, and almost likely, barring something strange happens, will form the next government. I actually wrote about it for the Free Press a few months ago, about how young people in this country who once backed Justin Trudeau and came out in a really big way 10 years ago. These were people who were 20, 21 at that time. They're now in their 30s, trying to buy a home, trying to get to the next stage in their lives, and they're unable to do that. They came out in a really, really big way in 2015, but now they've really soured on Justin Trudeau, and they can't wait to see him see him leave office and have a new government, come into power. So that's how bad things are in Canada for Justin Trudeau. He's probably one of the least popular politicians in the country. He's really let down a lot of Canadians, it's just his intent to resign was, people were breathing a sigh of relief that he had announced his intention to resign.
And can you give us a bit of sense of what immediately led to this? How did it pan out?
Well, it began really. There were a series of events, over the course of the last few months. You had a few backbench MPs last fall who wrote a letter without revealing who they were, saying that he needed to resign. And, they're looking at the polls, and their reaction is, well, we can't go into the next elections with you at the helm, so you need to resign. But nothing happened. Justin Trudeau prevailed. But things really came to a head in December when his finance minister, one of his most loyal lieutenants, announced her resignation a day before the fall economic statement was set to be released, in a very dramatic letter saying that she could no longer serve the prime minister, and she was not very happy with the direction in which this country was headed, especially as far as Trudeau's economic policies were concerned. And so her resignation sent shockwaves through the Liberal Party establishment. If Chrystia Freeland, has lost faith in Justin Trudeau, someone who willingly went along with everything. If you remember, Fraser, I recorded a podcast with Brendan O'Neill shortly after the truckers' protest, when Trudeau announced the invocation of emergencies power to crush what was basically a peaceful protest against government overreach and lockdowns and vaccine mandates here in Canada. His Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister and deputy prime minister at that time, announced the freezing of people's bank accounts. And so she was loyal to the very end, and her resignation is what led this to happen. It was a catalyst for what ended up happening a few weeks later. It became very clear over the Christmas break that his days were basically numbered as prime minister.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the truckers incident there and the crackdown on the truckers, because this wasn't a lone act. Justin Trudeau exhibited a lot of signs of authoritarianism, attacks on free speech and things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about his role there?
Well, I mean, he what happened was these protesters were here for 3 weeks, and all they wanted to do was have a conversation with the Prime Minister. They felt that they had been forgotten during the pandemic, and indeed they were. And they felt that their best option really was to come to Ottawa and make their voices heard. So they honked and honked and honked because that was their way of expressing their frustration. No one was listening to them. And on Valentine's Day, Justin Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act, rarely used emergency powers to get rid of these protesters. And what happened after was, there was a suspension of civil liberties briefly over that period, and then his finance minister announced the debanking of people who had shown up to protest or donated to the freedom protest. So if you are a grandmother who donated $50 to the freedom to the truckers protest, you found yourself frozen out of your bank account for possibly weeks. And Chrystia Freeland presided over this, and there are videos of her taking great pleasure in announcing this very draconian act. And think about it. I mean, this is the kind of thing that happens in tinpot dictatorships, but yet it was happening right here in a G7 capital. And what's extraordinary about this, Fraser, is that most Canadians supported this move. I think it's important to criticize Justin Trudeau and his government and the Liberal Party, but Canadians willingly went along with this. Polls showed that 44% of Canadians a year after the Emergencies Act was invoked strongly supported the measure, and 22% said they somewhat supported. That's a large chunk of people, who just, were okay with this kind of, if you want to call it soft authoritarianism.
Do you think freedom has come to be really devalued in Justin Trudeau's Canada in other ways other than this particular example?
I think so. I've seen, a censorship regime that has taken root in a way that I've not seen before. We have legislation that prevents you from, for example, if I were to read my own stories on Instagram or Facebook, I'm not able to do that because of a legislation that is now in place that prevents social media companies from sharing news stories, and this was a way for and the government rationalized this by saying, well, social media companies, they're bad, and we're backing the small guy, and that's the journalist. But most of these new media houses are legacy news outlets, and they depend on the government for handouts. So freedom, in a big way, has been devalued in this country. Everything from the media to just the average person's support for draconian measures they've just gotten so used to the government telling them what they should think, what they should do, and that's a big part of the problem.
Another thing you've done a lot of coverage of, a lot of reporting of over the years, is on some of the rebellions in Canada against Trudeau's policies around trans and gender. Has Canada taken a more extreme stance on that than other places? I mean, how would you explain it to outsiders?
Oh, 100%. The problem here in Canada, like with so many other issues, is that we're not even having a conversation about these very important issues. At a time when all of these other countries, including the UK and several European countries and many American states, were starting to move away from puberty blockers and DEI and all of these other very, very destructive, this very destructive ideology. Canada was actually doubling down on this. So we're nowhere near where these other countries are in terms of having serious conversations. There are no lawsuits against doctors who've butchered, the bodies of young kids. We're not when it comes to DEI. America seems to be moving away from it, whereas here we're still very much involved in all of that. So, I really do think that, people still haven't woken up to the dangers of, of what this kind of thing can do.
And I wanted to cast your mind back to the sort of post Black Lives Matter period. Canada almost had its own version. It was a bit of a reckoning around the treatment of Indigenous people, but some of the stories that came out were essentially, most people would say, were not true. Talks of atrocities against children that were the basis for protests, were the basis for the burnings of churches. Those stories unravelled. Can you remind people a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just around the time of Black Lives Matter, there was a news story that claimed that there were all of these unmarked graves of young Indigenous children that had been discovered. Some kind of radar technology had radar technology had picked up signs of the bodies of young children buried deep underground, and everybody picked up on the story. The New York Times, just about everybody, went with these sensational headlines that 500 bodies of children have been found, and which led to the Prime Minister lowering the flag to half-mast indefinitely. It went on for months and months and months, and it turned out that this was a total lie. There was a possibility that there could have been gray bodies buried underneath, but it really there was no, a year later there was not even a single excavation that was done, that was undertaken, and there were no bodies. There was nothing, no bodies to speak of. So the question is, why did people go along with this? Why did the Prime Minister lower the flag at half-mast? Why was there the self-flagellation? The leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, went on national television and said that Canada is one of the most racist countries in the world, and there was this just this self-flagellation and self-loathing of what it meant to be Canadian, and it was all based on a lie.
And Rupa, you wrote a really interesting piece saying, we can't blame all of Canada's problems on Justin Trudeau. There are, various pathologies in the broader establishment. Is there, but is there still some hope with Trudeau leaving, with Trudeau on the way out? Can some of the damage be repaired?
That's a great question, Fraser, and something that that I ask myself a lot. The rot is so incredibly deep right now. Even if Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister, there's only so much that he can do. But there's just so it's not just Trudeau. Trudeau, I think, deserves blame. Obviously, he's been leader for the last 10 years. the point I was trying to make is that this predates Trudeau. The system that we've willingly accepted in this country. Our healthcare system is socialized. We have cartels in all aspects of the economy. When it comes to telecommunications, for example, we have a handful of companies. The media, just a handful of companies. Airline, there's a handful of companies. There's absolutely almost no competitive edge in any of these sectors. And Canadians, and this is Justin Trudeau didn't bring this about. This has existed. Has existed for a very long time, for decades before he even came on the scene. So the question really is, how do we move away from less, how do we get to less socialism? That's the question. Canadians have been on this diet of socialism for forever. They've the government is the largest employer in this country. Not just at the federal level, but provincial and municipal as well. The government is in every aspect of your life, and people have gotten used to it. We have a dysfunctional healthcare system. I can't get a family doctor. I have been waiting for like 15 years for a family doctor. Canadians are actually going to the U.S. to see a doctor and pay for those services when we should be able to get that here. So there's something really, something's really gone bad here, and it needs serious fixing. And I don't know how much of that the next Prime Minister, if that is Pierre Poilievre, I don't know how much of that he can actually do, because he's no superhero. Ultimately, it'll come down to Canadians. They're going to have to ask themselves they're going to have to introspect and ask themselves some very tough questions. Do we, are we okay with the status quo? Are we okay with just patching things up a little bit here and there and moving on to the next thing? Or do we seriously want to work towards a complete overhaul of the system where individual liberties are protected, where I can see a doctor if I need to, where I don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money for a cell phone plan when my neighbors 100 miles south of me in the United States don't have to do that. These are some very fundamental questions that Canadians have to ask themselves, and there's going to be a lot of work involved. There's going to be a lot of pain along the way. One of the stories that I wrote recently was about speaking to Canadians who actually want to take up Trump on his offer of Canada becoming the 51st state, because that's how bad things are. They feel that Trump stepping in and making Canada the 51st state would actually help solve some of these problems that I mentioned, because even with political change, it's not going to make that much of a difference in the end.
Actually, that brings me on to my final question. Can Canadians find a sort of source of national self-confidence again? Because certainly something that Justin Trudeau was fond of saying was that Canada is a sort of post-national, post-borders country. And it seems as if even some people, I imagine the people who want Trump to take over Canada, are probably not fans of Trudeau, but they possibly accept or, are willing to give up their national identity. I mean, that's very striking.
Well, what is Canada's national identity, right? And again, Trudeau was picking up something that he just put that into words. But Canadians have long defined themselves as not American. I don't know if you've seen a tweet, a post by the Liberal Party a couple of days ago with a map of North America, the U.S., Canada and the U.S. The U.S. is clearly labeled as United States. Canada is labeled as not the United States. Justin Trudeau was on CNN yesterday, and he was talking about the 51st state, and he said, Canadians know who they are. They know that they're not Americans. That's not that doesn't tell me that's not that tells me there's a lack of self-confidence there, actually, when it comes to your identity. That's not how you define yourself, in terms of who you are, as a Canadian. You have to have a positive sense of what it means to be Canadian, not a negative sense of what you're not. And that goes to the crux of the matter in a way. Who are Canadians? You speak to someone in Quebec, they have a clear sense of who they are. And they're very proud of their culture, they're very proud of their language, they're very proud of their history. That's not necessarily the case in much of Anglo-Canada, and that's what Trudeau was, that's what he was really referring to, and that's going to be an issue that keeps coming up over and over again as long as Trump keeps trolling Canada and keeps saying that we should be the 51st state, because that goes to the heart of what is Canada. Are Canadians just going to accept this and be okay with being part of the 51st state, or is there a great sense of national identity, and pride that you are going to stand up for Canada and fight for this country?
Rupa Subramanya, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fraser.